Hi, sociology students. It's Mrs. T again, and this is your next installment of our social stratification lessons in week 9. So this video is going to be a little longer than the first one because I'm going to try to splice it together toward the very end, because the first person that we're going to talk about is a classical theorist. You might see his name on the board over here, Karl Marx. By the way, I'm sorry about the glare on the top of the board. I'm trying to get the board positioned well so you could pause the video right now, for instance, and see everything that's on it. But please, if you are going to copy this down as the skeleton of what your notes should have in it, I do suggest you do that. Please leave yourself plenty of additional room that I don't have on my home whiteboard, because we're going to have a lot of discussion about this too. I guess since it's a YouTube video, it's going to be me talking at ya, but think of it as discussion, because I hope that your wheels will be turning when I'm talking about this to you. But anyway, leave yourself a lot of room to write additional information, because I just really have the bare bones of this skeleton up on the board, okay? So please refer to your capitalism notes that you just took in the previous lesson to understand what this classical theorist, his name is Karl Marx, and he is not just somebody that you will hear discussed in our sociology class, but your history class, your economics class, your philosophy class, maybe even mathematics, political science, definitely. You will hear his name in so many other courses because he has really valuable things to think about. Not to say that he was 100% correct about everything he wrote about or discussed, but he wrote abundantly about his views, his philosophical views on the economics and class structure and things like that. And so he has a lot of food for thought. Think of it that way. Food for thought in a lot of different courses that you're going to take in your degree plan. Now, capitalists tend to not like Karl Marx very much because he did not like capitalism. Let me just get that out of the way. He did not like capitalism at all. He thought capitalism was evil. He thought it needed to be eradicated. He thought that it was the root of all of the injustice in society, really. And so let's find out how, okay? So, Karl Marx said that capitalism caused all of the huge differences of categories of people, all of the inequality that happened in society. He saw capitalism as the cause. Because remember, capitalism encourages you to own social resources, own them or control them. If they're not something that can be owned, like rights or laws or something like that, you still can control them and maybe not apply those rights or those laws equally among the population if you control them. So he said capitalism, since it encouraged ownership and a constant cycle of re-ownership and more ownership and more ownership, that after a while it ended up with two and only two social classes. So he is a classical theorist because he was looking at a time in history, a couple, 100, 150, 200 years ago. He was looking at history from the Industrial Revolution and everything that happened when big business, factory owners started to get power in society because of that capitalist cycle. So he said that capitalism always, when unchecked, ends in two and only two social classes. So if you can see what I have drawn over here, I don't really know that you can call this a ladder. It's more like a step stool to me, since it only has the two social classes on it. But this ladder represents all people in society, and the two rungs of the ladder represent the divisions among or between. When there's two things, you say between. When there's more than two things, you say among. So he said that there are two social classes that the cycle of capitalism always creates if there's no law or any kind of check or balance in place. And he was not an advocate for laws or checks and balances to bring capitalism into greater compliance with equality. He just wanted to get rid of capitalism altogether. So he didn't like it at all, and here's why. Now please note these two French words that he used in order to describe these two different social classes that he said capitalism always results in. Okay? So, the bourgeoisie is the upper class, or about 1% of the population, and the proletariat is the lower class, or about 99% of the population. Now, in your textbook, you will see these words, bourgeoisie and proletariat. You will also see capitalist class for this upper class in society, and you will see working class for this lower class in society. Those are correct college level divisions of the two classes that Karl Marx talked about. But you know, Mrs. T, I'm always asking you to take on more college level vocabulary. And even though bourgeoisie and proletariat are not the only names for the upper class and the lower class in Karl Marx's theory, bourgeoisie and proletariat are going to be words that you see all throughout all of your college classes that you have to take in your degree plan. You will see it in World Lit, you will see it in political science, you will see it in history, you will see it everywhere in some of the reading assignments that your professors give you, in addition to what they're talking about in class. So right now, I want you to pay a little bit more of attention to old Mrs. T when she's talking to you about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, because if you remember them from sociology class, you'll be that much farther ahead in all your other classes when you get to a point where you're talking about these divisions. So, bourgeoisie, say it with me, boys and girls, bourgeoisie, that's the upper class or the capitalist class, and proletariat, say it with me, proletariat. This is the lower class, according to Karl Marx's classical theory on social stratification. So, let's talk about why and how Karl Marx said the bourgeoisie comes to be the keeper of the social resources, whether it's power, whether it's rights, whether it's raw materials, whether it's entitlement, all of these different kinds of things. So, because of the way capitalism works, look back at that previous video and hopefully you drew it in your notes, that cycle I had drawn on the board. Because of the way that works, over time, Karl Marx said that the bourgeoisie become the owners of all, do you see this word here, all? The owners of all the quotes, do you see my quotes here? The means of production and the means of distribution. I put quotes around this because these are his words, and these are additional phrases that you are going to hear and see in all of your other classes as you move up in your knowledge level and in your reasoning skills in college. So, means of production and means of distribution. I believe I used the cotton fields up the road from me a minute ago when I was talking about this shirt. So, let's use that again. This shirt has some production materials that go into it. The land would be a means of production, the plants itself would be a means of production, the machines I mentioned would be a means of production, the cotton gin, all of these different kinds of things that make that cotton flower ready to spin into thread so that that thread can be woven into this fabric and made into a shirt. The factory that does all of the spinning and the weaving and the sewing into the shirt, all of these things and everything in between is considered a means of production for this shirt and all of the other shirts like it that were made at the time it was made. Okay? So, since capitalism encourages you to own stuff, make a profit, reinvest some of that profit, and start over again, every time you start over again, you're buying up more land, buying up more machines, buying up more cotton gins, buying up more factories. That's what you would do if you're focused on a profit about making this shirt. There's another side to it though. You can't just make the shirt and leave it in the factory, right? You need trucks You need to distribute these shirts. You need stores where people can go physically and buy them, or you need a website where people can go and choose it and have it shipped. And you need not only the shipment from the factory to the storefront or to the internet warehouse, but you need the shipping from that warehouse to you. You've seen the drone deliveries. You've seen the Amazon Prime trucks driving all over the state these days. Those are part of the means of distribution. Just like the oil and diesel refineries and the oil rigs off the Gulf Coast and the refineries along, Houston and Beaumont, Texas, and all down around Louisiana. Those places that produce oil and gas and all of the fuels necessary for the means of production are also the means of production. I'm not sure that Amazon owns any oil refineries yet, but Jeff Bezos probably has it on his list. So the bourgeoisie own all after a while. Usually you should be suspicious of the word all if you're in a true-false question. Usually that's a trick. But according to Karl Marx, after the cycle of capitalism just goes around and around and around, one class and one class of people only continue to buy each other out until there's very, very few bourgeoisie who own all the means of production and distribution. And then there's the rest of us, the proletariat. But a class system, if you remember from, I think, 2 video lectures ago, a class system is based on ownership of stuff. And how do you earn wages and salary, or how do you get profit so that you can live from that ownership that you have? Well, if the bourgeoisie own all of the means of production and distribution, then what is left for the proletariats to own? What do the proletariat own? They own their labor. How much does the bourgeoisie have to pay you for your skill or unskill? The vast majority of proletariat, especially in early times when Karl Marx was studying all of this and examining this question, the vast majority of proletarian were very unskilled and very, very replaceable. The bourgeoisie did not have to pay them very much for their labor because they weren't specialized. And if they weren't specialized, the proletariat themselves simply became another thing to own in the means of production and the means of distribution. If all I need to do is be available on the weekends and be able to lift 20 pounds, well, that gives that job qualification to many, 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 many of us in the population. If my skill is neurosurgery, well, not very many people have neurosurgery as a skill, but I still don't own the hospital. I don't own the insurance company that covers me. I don't own the equipment that I use in the surgery. I don't pay the nursing staff their salary, somebody else does. Then I am a proletariat also. Now, there aren't very many of me to go around if I'm a neurosurgeon, so you have to pay me way more than the person in the factory making this shirt, because my labor is worth more. I am more scarce. So the higher your skill as a proletariat, the more the bourgeoisie has to pay you. They're still going to try to pay you as little as they can because you're part of the capitalist cycle now. And if I'm paying you really, really good wages, my profit goes down. And capitalism focuses on profit. So the bourgeoisie owns, can I use that word? This word does not mean slave. Proletariat does not mean slave. But the bourgeoisie owns or controls the behavior of the proletariat to a large extent, because if you have a specialized skill, I'm going to set the price for what your wages are going to be. But if you don't have a specialized skill, I will pay you less than peanuts, and I have no concern whether your family is being evicted, whether you can afford bread and bologna, whether you can have any of this stuff. That's not my concern. If you need more wages, well, then you should have had your labor be worth more before you had all those kids. I'm speaking as a bourgeoisie might, okay? Role-playing here. So Proletariat, they own their labor, but if your labor's not worth much, well, then you're poor. You're extremely impoverished. And we will be talking about the different types of poverty that exist in the world in one of the coming lectures. But right now, I'm going to pause this lecture. It's probably going to be an ugly cut. I don't want it to be, but it's probably going to be an ugly cut here. I'm going to pause this lecture, erase this board, write a modern update to Karl Marx's theory that you can read about in chapter 7 in your book. I'll put some skeleton notes on that and then splice it with this, so I hope it's not too ugly, but I'll be right back. Okay, there's that ugly splice that I did, but magic, the board is redone, so we're going to talk about that modern update to Karl Marx's classic theory. So in chapter 7, you will read about a modern theorist still writing today. This guy is not from 150 years ago. This guy is from today. His name is Eric Wright. He's a very well-known social stratification theorist in sociology, and he appreciates and likes Karl Marx's input from early on, but he modernizes it and updates it after capitalism, which is an economic system and a social institution, became affected by legal systems, which is another social institution that relates to that, and it created different social stratification and different economic structures and laws, and the shape of society morphed as change happens over time anyway. The shape of society morphed into additional social classes according to the way Eric Wright analyzes our modern situation. So he calls it advanced capitalist societies. So essentially what occurs in advanced capitalist society is an effort to quell, Q-U-E-L-L, to quell the unrest that can really be fostered by proletariats being treated so poorly by bourgeoisie. And since bourgeoisie really like profit, maybe more than human life. I mean, I'm generalizing that. That implies that there is no morality within somebody who wants to be wealthy, and that's not true. I think all of us would like to be wealthy. I would, I think. Seems nice when I see it on TV. Anyway, so it implies that those capitalists or the bourgeoisie of Karl Marx's day had no concern for human life and would really use and throw away those proletariat. And so that's why legal regulations got into it and that kind of thing. So Eric Wright looks at advanced capitalist societies, and he finds that there are actually, in his analysis, 4 classes of people in advanced capitalist societies. Now, he uses the capitalist class and the working class in his model. So another word for this is what? Bourgeoisie. And another word for this is what? Proletariat. So you can use that. I would accept that in an explanation if I asked you for one regarding capitalists and working class here on this model. But essentially, what Eric Wright sees when he zooms out and does a mega macro scale analysis of the situation, he sees that capitalists around the world are global. They're global industrialists. They own interest in natural resources like rare earth minerals or fossil fuel reserves. They own interest in all of those things. They have corporations that are big legal entities that own tons of different companies or banks. There's something called Yum Foods, for instance, which owns things like Taco Bell and Pizza Hut and KFC, I think. I might be getting some of those wrong, but these are huge corporations that own huge businesses within them. And so there are capitalists who own the interest in those big conglomerates. This word is conglomerate right there in case the lighting is not good. So capitalists are global creatures, in this case, who own interests in lots of different areas of the world. It can be a very, very depressed area of the world, like we will look at when we get into chapter 8. It can be one of those underdeveloped nations, and Eric Wright criticizes the capitalists for controlling and owning all of the resources that could go for the benefit of the population in that area. But that's the situation with capitalists. They don't have anything to do with managing these corporations. They employ something called the managerial class. Now, please be careful with what you think of when you hear the word manager. I'm not talking about the JCPenney on Military Road has a general manager. No. I'm talking about managerial class are the CEOs, the bank presidents. They are the people. There is a corporation called Bank of America, for instance, and they have a chairman of the board that controls all of the banks of America in the United States, all those locations, the cyber banking, the physical banking, international banking, all of this kind of stuff. The mortgage side, the savings account side, the investment side, all of these huge things are wrapped up in managerial people who have really top-level clearance, top-level trust by the capitalists, and they are the supervisors of all the workers who actually have to do the hands-on kind of stuff. Okay, so Sony Corporation, how many different entities does that own? Managerial class people manage all of those things together so that it makes a profit for the capitalists. Small business owners, notice that I have that they own their stores and they have employees and they do high-level work. So small business own their stores. So I say this like this to explain. When I was talking about this a few semesters ago, and I was asking for examples, you know, I was talking about the capitalist or the managerial class, and I was asking for examples, and somebody mentioned a fellow who you might know his name in Central Arkansas anyways. He has a lot of car dealerships around. His name is Steve Landers. You see Landers on the side of all kinds of locations around Central Arkansas. And so they said, oh, he's a capitalist because he has all these car dealerships. No, that even though that we're talking about the state of Arkansas, when we're talking about capitalists being global people, Steve Landers, God bless him, is not a capitalist. He's not even a managerial class person according to Eric Wright's model here. He would be a small business owner. And you might think, small business, he's got to make a quadzillion dollars a year, and God bless him, I hope he does. But even if he is making quadzillion, however many zeros goes on that number, and I hope that YouTube Captions knows how to spell quadzillion. Anyway, he's a small business owner class because he does some of his work himself, or we wouldn't even know his name or see him on TV making his advertisements, and he doesn't really own the inventory of what he is selling. Toyota Corporation or Jeep or whatever other things that he sells, these corporations sort of use him as an intermediary to get their supply out to people in a particular region. So he would be a small business owner that employs a lot of people and is really just a tool that the managerial class allows to occur, so that the managerial class is not the boots on the ground for the Toyota Corporation, for instance, but they manage the franchise that he has and allows him to sell their product and use their logo so that he can make money and pay employees and really be a force for economic exchange in the region where he is. So he exists so that the capitalists can make more money from the Toyota Corporation. And he exists as a boots-on-the-ground person who I doubt he really does any of the financing paperwork anymore, but he doesn't own the finance company. He doesn't own that banking side. He probably collects interest from those loans that he enacts when we go and buy a Prius from him, like I did. But he is still not even managerial. He is a small business class person. I think in the previous portion of this video, I talked about being a neurosurgeon. Well, I own my skill and I sell my skill. It's a very high level work. I sell it to the hospital conglomeration that has managerial classes that seek me out and evaluate my work and hire me on a contract basis. I might not have employees that I pay. Maybe the hospital pays those nurses, pays for the equipment, all that kind of stuff on my behalf, but I'm still bringing in profit for those capitalists, for the managerial class who's managing it on the capitalist behalf. So small business owners generate profit. Yes, they have a share of it, absolutely, or there would not be an incentive for them to do it to begin with. But the only reason they exist in the modern capitalist update, according to Eric Wright, is really for social stability, really for so that there won't be any social unrest from the proletariat who are only allowed to own their labor. There's like no stepstone between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. So these are some stepping stones. And now we're down to the working class again. And with working class, think of unskilled labor. I've got some familiar words to you on the board here. They should be familiar. I've used them several times up to now. Blue collar, pink collar, white collar even, the low-level stuff, like you'll have when you get your bachelor's degree. Now, perhaps you'll be discovered or invent something and become an entrepreneur, and then you'll be bought up by some corporation, and maybe, I hope that happens for you. Maybe you can give me a job if that does happen. But working class are going to be sometimes highly skilled blue collar, carpenters, cabinet makers, people who build bridges, for instance, work with industrialized concrete mixes and stuff like that. A good friend of ours shuts down paper mills and like redoes all the equipment on a cyclical basis, and he has really high level blue collar skills and makes great money because of that skill. However, in my opinion, great money is peanuts, really, compared to managerial class and capitalists, definitely. The great money that keeps me at home instead of protesting in the street for more of my slice of the pie, that great money is simply an expense that keeps me, like I said, it keeps me from being involved in activism to kind of overthrow the power structure and get more of my own. So working class people tend to have this wage fight. We want a union to get more benefits, to get better, better salary and promotion potential. But all of that is allowed and funded simply so it keeps us kind of complacent. It keeps us kind of, drugged. Remember that word for later on when we're going to talk about another aspect of Karl Marx's philosophy about how, you got to keep these people peaceful because this is the vast majority of the population. Even in Eric Wright's model, I have not given you percentages to put on these rungs of this ladder, but in Eric Wright's model, the working class is still the vast majority of the population. So we have power in numbers, but if we are complacent, if we do not have class consciousness, as you will read about in your textbook, and please look up class consciousness, do a Google search. Google's in trouble right now for controlling our information and not giving us choices onto how we search the web. But anyway, if the working class is kept comfortable, then we don't tend to band together and demand more equality in a society. And so Eric Wright doesn't really advocate class consciousness like Karl Marx did, but we can look at his divisions that he has here and maybe see how lawmakers and policymakers have adjusted that class structure that capitalism creates. They've adjusted and regulated things about that class structure so that things are a little more equal. I mean, we've got 4 social classes instead of 2. So I'm interested to hear what you think about all of this. You can write about it in your reaction paper or post it on the discussion board, and we will talk about Max Weber and another fellow, Gilbert is his last name, who have other ideas about classic class structure. That was hard to say. And modern class structure. So that will be in the next video that we have together. Thank you for your attention. Sorry this was long. Bye.